Hello everyone and welcome to this week's engineer interview with Dallas. Now, my name is Scott and I'm your host for today. Just before we start, I'd like to say thank you so much for signing up to this year's competition. For those of you who don't know, this is the Leaders Award competition where we ask the question, if you were an engineer, what would you do? Now, for those of you taking part, the deadline for submissions is March 22nd this year. So once you've finished the competition, class, please send them in to us. Now, during these interviews, we're going to be speaking with engineers who work on loads of different projects, all of them showing the wonderful, interesting and exciting things that happen when you work in engineering. Now, our special guest today is going to tell us all about his mission to take science and technology out of the lab and into people's lives, but then we're going to follow that up with some questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat function in Teams and we'll pull them out. But for now, I'm going to start with a quick interview. And the first question for you, Dallas, is please introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thank you very much for having me is the first thing I've got to say, Scott. I want to say to all the young people and teachers watching, I'm really sorry we're late. We're 12 minutes late. That was my fault being unable to wrangle Microsoft Teams. So my apologies. I will be passing on my complaints to Bill Gates after this, saying Microsoft Teams is too difficult. Anyway, so sorry about that. So my name's Dallas Campbell, and I'm, I suppose, primarily best known as being a science television presenter. So I present science programs and engineering programs, factual programs, really. So I've worked a lot at the BBC Science Unit, as well as Nat Geo and the Discovery Channel, stuff like that. I've got to say though, I didn't start off. I was a science, because most people who are science presenters, they start off in science and then, they find their way into presenting. I kind of came about it the other way around. So I actually come from an arts background. I trained.
Wow.
I spent 3 years studying drama, which was fun, pretending to be an acorn growing into an oak. That kind of thing. But my problem was, well, it wasn't really a problem. I was always very, very interested in science when I was a kid. And when I grew up, I used to watch programs like Tomorrow's World and all the kind of BBC science output that used to be. This is in the in the 1700s, because I'm very old. So I always loved science, even though I wasn't particularly. I didn't particularly want to be a scientist. And when I was at drama school, I spent too much time reading popular science books and not enough time reading Stanislavski and all the stuff I should have been reading. And so I developed this real sort of interest in science. And from there, that was kind of it, really. I actually realized that the kind of path I wanted to choose after leaving school, I thought, I'm going to be an actor. I want to be a movie star. That's what I want to be. And then I realized, like, actually, no, I'm much better suited to doing this. And so I was lucky. I had a few lucky breaks, actually.
A few lucky breaks and quite a lot of excitement on the way as well, with the sounds of things. So that was sort of, you had this vision of becoming an actor, and then you've gone on to work in TV and film and communicate so much science. What about earlier? What were you like in primary and secondary school, would you say?
Well, here's the thing. There's young people watching, so I probably shouldn't tell them too much. I actually dug up a copy of my old school report, because I was interested, because when you said, "Oh, tell us a little bit about school and what were you like," and when I was at school, my school reports are pretty harsh, and I found a couple of my science reports, and they really weren't very good. I think I was too easily distracted by other things. So I actually really enjoyed school. I went to a boarding school up in Scotland, up in Perthshire. And it was a very different world. We didn't have phones, we didn't have social media, and so it was a very rural school, very, very isolated. So school for me was kind of bikes and camping and mucking about generally. And I had a good time, probably a bit too much of a good time. I spent a lot of time. I was in a band, which I enjoyed doing, and I did lots of drama, lots of theatre and stuff. Yeah. Probably my schoolwork suffered a bit, but the one thing that school gave me, more than kind of qualifications or anything else, was a real kind of sense of curiosity about the world. Like, it really instilled that idea of being interested and just the simple pleasure of finding things out. And I definitely got that from school. And it wasn't just school, it was primarily teachers. I was very blessed to have some really good teachers who were good fun and just had that real love of learning. So that's really what I got from school. Yeah, I probably could have done better in my exams.
Well, it sounds
Anyway,
it sounds as well that you had these.
so you can't see my terrible school report.
It sounds like, as you said there, you had some very some teachers that left a mark, perhaps, and
Yeah.
you went on to study drama and acting, and then you've gone on, but you've always had this love of science, engineering, and technology. Was there anything or anyone that inspired you when you were young into thinking about that industry?
It's a really good question, actually, because I loved acting. I had actors in my family, so acting was a kind of normal thing for me because I had uncles and things who were actors. But it was probably watching television. There used to be a TV show. I think it may be still on. Blue Peter. Is Blue Peter still on?
Yeah, Blue Peter's still on.
Okay, I remember Blue Peter. So this is the 1970s. There was a Blue Peter presenter called John Noakes, and John Noakes he was from Yorkshire, and he had a dog called Shep. And John was a bit of an action man. I mean, he was a kind of really the most unlikely action man. He was just a regular guy, kind of skinny and geeky and gawky, but really funny. He had a great sense of humor. And they'd sort of send him up to clean Nelson's column, and he'd have to kind of, or he'd have to like jump out of an aeroplane. And anyway, he always sort of had adventures. And I remember thinking as a kid, when I grow up, I want to be John Noakes. I think John Noakes would be a terrific thing to be. So it was a lot of TV people. John Noakes. There was a presenter called James Burke, who used to do lots of science television programs. Michael Rodd, who used to do. It was, I grew up watching a lot of television because there wasn't anything else to do. We didn't have the internet, so we tended to watch, whatever was on TV. So TV, I think, television science particularly, and factual programming generally, had a real impact on me because it was a window to the world. I'd watch something like Blue Peter, and you'd see these extraordinary stories about people doing amazing things and crazy things, and science and engineering, and and then after Blue Peter, there'd be the news, and then there'd be Tomorrow's World, and then there'd be more exciting stuff. So that love of learning from school and from teachers, plus add funky 70s telly equals my career, basically. Basically, I just wanted to be John Noakes. You guys will have to look up John Noakes if you don't know who John Noakes is. Actually, there's a very good. It's called BBC Archive. It's on Facebook and Twitter and that kind of stuff. And they've got little clips of old BBC shows, and sometimes there's a bit of John Noakes on there. If you Google John Noakes Nelson's column, it's one of the great bits of television you'll ever see. And actually, funnily enough, I did a BBC One documentary series called Super Size Earth, where I had to climb the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, and then jump off the top. And I remember, this is a few years ago. I remember thinking, I've done it. I'm John Noakes. I've become John Noakes. This is great.
Well, that obviously left a lasting impression with you, seeing him sort of scale Nelson's Tower. And you said yourself there that you've gone on to do similar things in the largest building in the world. Can you please tell us about some of the incredibly exciting things you've managed to work on over the last few years?
Well, okay. It didn't just have happened. It was a bit of it's kind of an odd story, because no one sort of came up to me and said, all right, will you come and please be John Noakes? We're looking for John Noakes. When I was still acting, I was living in America at the time. I was living in Los Angeles being an actor. And me and my friend Jonathan, good friend of mine who I was living with at the time, he was a comedian and did sort of comedy stuff. And we had this idea and again, like me, really loved science. And we loved talking about science and engineering and how stuff works. And we loved all that. And we thought, well, why don't we write a TV show? Well, rather than you have like Professor so-and-so like telling you stuff, which is the kind of standard format, why don't we do a show where we have an idiot who doesn't know anything, like on a journey to find stuff out, and we thought that was quite funny. So we came up with this idea called Dallas in Wonderland. And each week on Dallas in Wonderland, I sort of cast myself in the role of the each week in Dallas in Wonderland, I would kind of go on a kind of journey of discovery and find something out. So one week we tried to journey to the center of the earth. One week I tried to break the men's 100 meters record, like impossible things. So it was kind of genuine scientific inquiry into absurd hypothetical questions. Anyway, we thought this was a really funny idea. So we sort of touted around some of the studios in LA, and lo and behold, we managed to sell it. We'd made it, and I made that show for the Discovery Channel. Gosh, nearly 20 years ago, a long time ago. And then from having done that show, which was really fun to do, actually terrific, you know, you get to meet all kinds of interesting people. I then went back to the UK and I did a show called The Gadget Show, which is a technology program, consumer technology program, just as a presenter. You know, we'd test stuff out, testing gadgets. And it was funny, actually, when I was doing that, it was just before the first iPhone came out.
Oh, wow.
So the world was very different. It was really interesting doing gadget. And suddenly the iPhone happened. And I remember covering the very first iPhone on The Gadget Show. And everything changed. Like literally everything changed. And so I was lucky to sort of be around when that was going on. And then from that, I moved to the BBC Science Unit, and I did a show called Bang Goes the Theory, which was a kind of a science magazine show, early evening, so 7:30 in the, you know, after the news on BBC One. Very much a family-orientated show. And the point of that show was, very often, if you're not involved in science or engineering, you kind of don't really know what's going on. And we wanted to show people that this is not like stuff that other people just do, like engineering is just something that engineers do. We wanted to show how it affects all of our lives, and the stories of engineering and what people do and how people build and how people make things and the discoveries they make is something that we're all invited to. You know, we wanted it to be a show that everyone's invited to, because very often, you know, when people talk to me about science and engineering, they go, "Oh, you present programs about science and engineering, you must be an engineer." And I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not." And because it's a bit like if you come out of the cinema and someone says, "Oh, you've been watching a film, you must be a film director."
Yeah.
You know, that'd be a ridiculous thing to say. But we've got this kind of weird thing about science and engineering as something that other people do. And we very much wanted to show especially young people that you can do this. This is for you. It's interesting. So I did that for a number of years, and then some big documentary series after that. I did, you know, Super Size Earth, which was a series that we went all around the world for several years, actually, just telling the stories about how the modern world works, how it's actually the speed of things, how in a single generation planet Earth has been transformed through engineering. So we did things like, you know, the highest buildings in the world. We did, you know, Mexican sewers. We did the invention of aviation. We did all those big stories. And it was just a beautiful series. I absolutely loved doing it. And, you know, those sorts of programs are a real privilege to do, because, you know, you get to meet incredible people, you get access to amazing things. And that access has given me a wonderful life of meeting interesting people. I work with astronauts a lot. I write about space history. So, you know, I worked with Tim Peake, and I went out to Kazakhstan for his launch, you know, and so I've been very involved in the UK space sector, which is another kind of interesting area. So yeah, that's it. But I'm not a scientist, and I'm very proud, in fact, to be a non-scientist who's kind of working in science, because you know, I want to invite people and say, look, that's it, you know, we're all scientists and engineers at heart, really, you know, and if you're lucky, you can make a career in it.
It's really interesting you say about, especially basically showing everybody just what scientists and engineers and technology people do to keep the world going. It's one of the things we get told a lot when we interview engineers, is that you only really hear about engineering when it doesn't work. Exactly. Because otherwise, your life works. I just want to remind the audience that if anyone has any questions for Dallas, please feel free to type them in the chat. We're going to read them out. But I just had one more question before we move on to the audience, actually, Dallas. Out of everything you've managed to do so far, you've obviously encountered so much of it, but I just want to ask what you love most about your job.
Oh, God.
It's a big question.
I'll tell you what I don't. Okay, the thing I love most about my job is the people you get to meet, because I'm really lucky, because you get to meet people who are just doing the most amazing stuff in science and engineering. So you get to meet everyone, and you get to travel all over the world, you know, talking to people who make it all work. There is this sort of anesthetic of the familiar. We just take the world for granted. Everything just kind of works. You know, you've got one of these, and it just kind of works. But this is magic. We've only had these for like 20 years or so, and already we're completely used to them, and we don't even think about them. But the technology that has gone into here and the history that's gone into here is just it's mind-blowing. So what I like to do is I like to remind people of just how extraordinary the human-made planet is, how extraordinary engineering is, and all the different guises of engineering particularly, and just sort of remind people there is an anesthetic of the familiar, a sedative, if you like. We just become numbed by how ordinary it seems. And I like to wake people up from that anesthetic and go, you know what? It's awesome. It's really interesting. And look at it. Oh, look at this over there. Look at this over here. That's what I like to do. That's the best bit. The worst bit is writing deadlines. Oh, like, we need the first draft of your book by tomorrow. And I'm like, oh.
I can't go explore amazing things and learn. I've got to do now.
Yeah.
So we've got some more questions coming in now. This one comes from Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones asks, who is your most favorite scientist / inventor and why?
Who's my most favorite? Gosh, what a question. Favorite? Mrs. Jones, the answer to that is whoever I'm reading about at the time.
Oh, wow.
I mentioned James Burke, who's not a scientist, he's a presenter, but he has a special place in my heart. I was a great fan of Carl Sagan.
Yeah.
Carl Sagan, an American planetary scientist who wrote a lot of popular science. And there's actually, if you want a good book to read, I would recommend The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. But I'm gonna because I'm writing a book at the moment, and I'm gonna say Robert Goddard, who's not, but you might not know the name Robert Goddard. You may have heard of the Goddard Space Center in America. Robert Goddard was an American inventor and scientist and engineer who invented the rocket. He built the very first liquid-fueled rocket in 1926.
Wow.
And his story is amazing. And partly because, I knew his story, I was familiar with it, but I found all his diaries. He kept meticulous notes about all his experiments and what he did. And what I love about Robert Goddard is just how beautifully he writes about what he does. He writes with this great wit and imagination and love, and I was just seduced by reading Robert Goddard's diaries. So I'm a big Robert Goddard fan at the moment. Anyway, he invented the rocket.
Wow,
well, co-invented the rocket. There were others as well, but in America he was the one.
Actually, you mentioned that there was others as well. One of the questions that we got sent into us is, out of all the things that you've gone to go and see, does it seem like all of this can all be made by people working together, or does it take people like maybe Goddard to be experts and run at it on their own?
It's really interesting. The way we do engineering and science has changed radically. The idea of the kind of lone genius, this sort of, is totally gone. Science is a collaborative team sport. It just is. It was different back then, I think. The way science was done was much more people working on their own. It was very much a male thing. There wasn't that sort of instant communication that we have now of sharing ideas. It was just a very, very different thing. So yes, science and engineering, it is a collaborative process. It's a collaborative process. It's an imaginative process. The idea of there isn't one person who invented AI, for example. You're seeing these big companies all kind of working together. So yes, but it's changed. It's changed for the better. I have to say.
I think so too. Yeah. And remember, anyone else has got any questions, please put them in the chat. We've got quite a few here.
Just very quickly, if you're interested in inventors and who invented things, I have a podcast called Patented, or Patented, however you want to pronounce it, which you'll find wherever you get your podcasts. And I discussed the nature of invention a lot on that. So, we've done lots and lots of episodes where we talk about the origins of things. And the one thing I always learn is there isn't an inventor of a thing ever. We tend to think, who invented the airplane? You go, well, the Wright brothers. Well, they didn't, because you can go much further back. And the Wright brothers were by this person and that person. The Wright brothers did some amazing stuff. They were the first people, if you like, to discover controlled flight, pitch, roll, yaw. That was the Wright brothers. But people were flying before the Wright brothers. And likewise, rocketry as well. Rockets only existed because, the Dewar flask was invented by a famous Scottish engineer, which meant we could keep gases in a liquid form, very cold, and then that means we could use liquid fuel, and therefore we built rockets, and therefore we can explore the solar system and go to the moon. So without the thermos flask, you don't get the rocket. And that's the same with everything. It's every invention, every without the iPhone. Well, do we need to thank Alexander Graham Bell for inventing the telephone and whenever it was 18 something. But before Alexander Bell, there were other people doing other things that made things work. So it's always a complicated, convoluted web of connections when we talk about inventors. And the thing is about being humans, we like to label the first. We like to have who was the first, who was the first, who was the first. But very often there isn't a first.
Oh, I like that. It also means as well that you don't have to be the person whose name is remembered to have been very much involved in the creation of something.
Yes, exactly.
So just moving on to some more questions. We've got this question comes in from Lily in Primary 7 at Patna Primary. If you were to revisit any part of your life and do anything differently, what would it be and why?
I'd visit about half an hour ago when I was trying to log on to Teams and just make that run a bit smoother. Any part of my life, well, as the old saying goes, regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I mean, every stage of life, things go well and things go badly. That is life. It's kind of about navigating that. If I could go back in a time machine, I'd go back to my school and maybe study a bit harder. But then if I studied a bit harder, maybe I wouldn't have been more interested in So who knows? I mean, certainly professionally, I suppose the kind of working at the BBC was always a highlight, because for me, BBC Science Unit was always the gold standard of broadcasting, particularly in science, and partly because I grew up with it. It was what I always looked up to. So having that opportunity of working for the BBC Science Unit was always great. I still do. I still do the Sky at Night. So I'm still hanging in there, even though I'm ancient.
Well, actually, there was a question with this because you said that if you changed something, maybe you couldn't have worked on all the things that you have. Yeah. Is there a project you want to do but haven't got round to yet?
Hundreds. I've got a whole drawer. I've got a whole drawer full of what would I like to do? There's like 100 books I want to write, but I'm too lazy. I don't write fast enough. I tell you something. That series, Supersize Earth, that we did, whatever it was, 15 years ago. I would really like to redo, because the world has changed so radically in the last 15 years. And there was a series I want to do as well, which is kind of about this, not necessarily the phone, but the fact that every time you touch an app, every time you buy something on Amazon, every time you go to Airbnb, whatever it is that you do on your phone, send someone a text message, we just kind of think magic things happen, and then magically Amazon delivers a thing. But what that does, it sets into process a whole chain of events, of things, of people, of jobs, of engineering. And I'd really like to tell that story, the story of from press buy to actually what happens, the trucks, the roads that need to get built, the warehouses, the robots, the AI that needs to be created, the algorithms that need to be written, and just really unpack that story across lots of different things. I think that would be a good series. I might make that.
Well, now I want to see that, so I really hope that goes through, because you've just got me thinking about everything needs to happen.
But what I'd like the kids to do, if they can think of a good title for that show, because sometimes actually when you're pitching a show to the exec, if you've got a good title, that sometimes can swing it.
That. So that's another task for everybody out there listening.
Do you know what I mean? I think that's, again, it's one of those how the world works shows, sort of lifting the curtain of the engineering world.
Oh man, right, okay, that's brilliant. So we've got some more questions, but I just want to say we're going to go for about 5 more minutes if everyone's got more questions. But this one is for yourself, Dallas. And this is relevant because you said that how much the world has changed in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most important engineering project at the moment, and why?
Crikey. What's the most important? Depends on how important is a sort of value judgment, isn't it? It's like how much value do I think that the thing, if you like, that is going to change everything is AI. If we can call AI an engineering project, I mean, it's computer engineering, so one. I think everyone, young people, are probably bored stiff of hearing about AI because everyone bangs on about it all the time. But the coming AI wave is going to change everything. I mean, already things like ChatGPT, which we all use and we all have fun with large language models and that kind of stuff, is kind of interesting. But, I was around at the time of the first digital revolution when the internet started and everyone talked about computers, and suddenly you had all of our minds were linked together using the internet, and that revolutionized everything. Everything changed because of the internet. The way we shop, the way we work, the way we do everything changed. The way we design things completely changed everything. But now designing intelligence that can do the kind of grunt work, that intellectual grunt work for us. So you had the original, if you want, industrial revolution, the steam engine that did manual labor for us, and the AI revolution, which is we're about to see, which is about to come at us like a big tsunami, is going to profoundly change everything in good ways and bad ways. Those big subjects, climate change, AI is going to help us solve that, because it's going to be able to think of better models. The models that we make, that climate scientists use, are going to become better streamlined, all that kind of stuff. Probing deeper into physics, understanding physics even better. So lots of exciting things AI is going to help us with, as well as all the terrible, awful things that may come as. But it depends how we use it. That's the thing. But AI, that's the most important thing, I think.
Wow. I think
there's a book. It's called. It's by Mustafa Suleiman. It's called The Coming Wave, I think. It's a kind of grown-up book, but it's a kind of, here are the good things about AI, and here are the terrifying things about AI.
Wow, this is like this is an interesting one. Actually, I add one to my list. That and Carl Sagan's book.
Sagan's book I read once a year to remind myself of just how easily the human brain is fooled.
So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. Before we get onto that, we actually have a suggestion for a TV show title. Alex from Perrywood, Unpacking the Journey.
Okay, idea for television show, Unpacking the Journey. Definitely my idea for the title. What's the Alex Perry Jones? Was that his name?
Perrywood, I believe, is the school.
Alex Perrywood, Unpacking the Journey. I think that's a cracking title.
That's good, isn't it? Yeah, I thought you might like that one.
Honestly, titles make a big difference. Unpacking the Journey is really good. If you see that on BBC One, feel free to come and sue me. We're recording this, so you've got evidence. So
we've got evidence. So, as I said, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. This one is, you mentioned that you've worked with a lot of astronauts and people who are responsible for helping us explore space.
Yeah.
If you were ever given the opportunity, would you go to space?
It's a great question. I know what makes a good astronaut because I work with astronauts, and the thing about being anyone, you and I, everyone, we could sit on a rocket and we could blast off to the International Space Station, and we'd be fine. As long as nothing goes wrong, we'd be fine, and anyone could do it. It's not, you don't need to be a special person to do it. The reason why astronauts are special people is it's what happens when something does go wrong. How do you react? Do you panic and start flapping about? If you've got 10 seconds of oxygen left because something's happened, how do you deal with that situation? So the good astronauts, well, back in the 1960s, an astronaut had to fly the spaceship and survive and report back. That was it. Nowadays, an astronaut has to do all of that. Plus, they have to be brilliant television presenters. They have to be communicators. They have to be scientists. They have to be engineers. They have to be, the complete package. I'm not that. I can say quite happily, I'd be a terrible astronaut. And that's okay as well. I'm quite sort of comfortable with that. But I would go, if it was a quick jaunt, quick orbit or something, I'd definitely be up for that. I'd be up for like a week on the moon. That would be nice. But those 6-month stints on the ISS are very, very challenging. And for me personally, I don't think I've got the right stuff. But if you do have the right stuff, then go for it. I mean, it's funny because it's interesting that a lot of astronauts come from the military, so test pilots. And again, it's that character. It's not about all the astronauts I know. The one thing that links them all together, they all have in common, is they're just nice people to be around.
Oh wow!
And if you're choosing to be on a 6-month trip to the International Space Station, you need people who are good fun, are funny, who are kind, generous, humble. Those are the qualities of the astronaut that are important. Much more than the kind of I'm good at science bit.
suppose it's people, isn't it?
It's people skills. It's like increasingly so. As we explore space, we're spending longer and longer in space. People are doing year-long missions now on the ISS. You got to get on well with people. Who would you go camping with?
Right. I like because you're still isolated and sent away.
It is. It's like how do you deal with isolation? How do you deal with people you might not get on with very well? How are you going to deal if suddenly your solar panel gets knocked out of and the oxygen that's the test of a good astronaut.
Well, you were talking about sort of the character of astronauts and what makes a good astronaut. I think this question's a good one to end on. If there was anybody out there who thinks I'm really interested in science and engineering, but I don't really know what to do, what advice would you have for them?
Okay, this is all the advice you need. Okay, that's a great question. Very often people are scared to talk to people. Oh, I don't want to talk to that person because people like me, people who work in science and engineering, they love to talk about their job because they love their job. Go talk to people. If you're interested in something, let's say you're interested in aircraft engineering, go talk to someone. Get online and find the name of someone interesting who works at Airbus or whoever, Rolls-Royce or whoever, and go and talk to them and say, "Hi, my name's I'm at this school. I'd love to," and they'd love to talk to you about it. That's my advice. Fear not is my advice. Sometimes it can be a bit nerve-wracking talking to grown-ups, or you think, "Oh, I shouldn't be doing this." We love it. Go talk to people, and don't be afraid of anything or anyone. Just do it.
That is some excellent advice, and I think that's an excellent.
If I could go back in time, I would eradicate that stupid, silly, being nervous about talking to people I had.
Because then you get to meet all these amazing people, and as you say, ask questions.
And ask questions, yeah. Find out what you like and go do it. No one's stopping. Okay, don't ask for permission. That's my advice. Don't ask for permission. Just go do it. Go talk to whoever you want, and then you can change the world, build whatever you want, make whatever you want, do whatever you want. It's great.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I think that's an absolutely excellent place to end on. I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. But a huge thank you to Dallas for inspiring all the engineers in the making out there. Because now, everyone, it is your turn to come up with your own engineering ideas. Remember to send them to us once you've finished so we can get our certificates sent out, and we'll hopefully see you at our in-person exhibitions at the end of the school year. But for now, I want to say a massive thank you again to Dallas. And remember, if you were an engineer, what would you do?